Hello everyone, this is Val Slaughter. Hope everybody's having a good semester and we're almost done. One more assignment to do and that's your final exam. I thought it would be helpful to you as you prepare for the final just to review some of the key concepts that we've worked with over the semester in assessment. I think you've all done a great job at understanding the importance of having learning outcomes and connecting those back to your assessments. So what I'd like to do is show you some of my own personal work that I did in my doctoral program that I think might help remind you of key concepts. So I'll be sharing some of that information with you as we talk through this brief little summary of what we've done this semester. So the first thing I want to show you is and remind you the importance of learning outcomes. And so as you'll notice on this is a blueprint that I created for use of technology in a particular course I was teaching at the time. And so the first column using an Excel or a Google Sheet format is your learning outcome. This particular project was around the unit. So in other words, a specific part of a course. So you'll notice that I've listed the learning outcomes here. And then what you'll see on this part is how I'm going to assess those learning outcomes. 3 different ways of assessment. The first one being a quiz, or as we have learned this semester, a formative assessment. That's to help students practice with knowledge. And depending on what the learning outcome was, there were quizzes or not quizzes. On the second column, you'll notice an exam. Exams are summative assessments. A summative assessment is used to help you decide whether or not a student has really learned the material and understands the material. And is a great way, in this particular case, it's at the end of a unit, for us to see what did they actually learn. So the other type of summative assessment that we can use is called the performance assessment. And some of you have used things like simulation, clinical skills checklists, also writing, and using rubrics. So in this particular assessment, I used an engagement rubric. How much did the student participate in the activities related to this learning outcome? So this is the performance rubric. So again, it's always good to have your outcomes directly connected to all the assessment pieces that you're going to use, including your formative and summative assessments. So it's very clear to your learners what your outcome is going to be. The second piece of that is creating a test blueprint and rubrics. So this test blueprint, for example, I created for a multiple choice exam that I created for a formative assessment. And you'll notice that it's fairly simple. Again, starting out with our course objective, what is our goal? What am I trying to assess? The second column is something in particularly in nursing education, but you can certainly translate that to clinical education. And that's how many hours did I spend covering this course objective or working with my learners in this area. In this particular case, I did a 3-hour session. This one I did a 3-hour session for an overall total of 6 hours. The next column is the content that was covered in that particular part of time, including and making sure that I directly connected this content to the course objective. The last 3 columns should look familiar to you. Using Bloom's taxonomy is an important part of education. We call that in education scaffolding of knowledge and learning. So our first level, our basic level, is knowledge and comprehension, usually used for things like definitions, trying to understand information, making sure that the student has a basic understanding. So for example, a list of predictive factors for genetics for a population or group was an important piece of knowledge. The second column is the application level. This is where, as a nursing educator in the clinical or the academic setting, we really want to strive for this column as our baseline. This is an important piece of ensuring that our learners can not only understand and comprehend the information, but they can actually apply it to a clinical situation or a scenario. So again, I added more content in this area because our goal is to increase application level knowledge and understanding and being able to apply it to clinical situations. So these kind of questions involve data about a case or information that's more objective or subjective that can lead you to the answer. The last column, or the analysis level, which is one of the higher levels, or synthesis level, is not very often tested on a multiple choice exam, and it does not work that way. Analysis is usually reserved for things like short answer and essay, so that you can see if a student learner can actually analyze the data and make some conclusions about that. So in my case, in this exam, I decided that there were a couple essay type questions, short answer, that I could ask that would help me get to this learning outcome from this particular content area. So for example, what that might look like on an exam is I'm doing some data mining from an actual record or database, and I'm applying it to a particular population and identifying what's going on with that population. Again, connecting back to my course objective. In addition to looking at objective testing, for summative assessment, we also use grading rubrics. A rubric is a great way to assess performance. We can use a rubric for papers, journal articles, conversations, discussions, presentations, projects. Again, a well-designed rubric will help give the student direct feedback on their performance. And if it's well tested and used between two or more different faculty or instructors, and there's consistency, it can be incredibly reliable and helpful for students. So in this case, I was working on a rubric for related to a population need and how students were assessing a particular population. So my grading rubric was developed with the again, similar to what we did with the assessment plan. I have my learning outcomes here, and then I break it up into content, support, organization, and mechanics and style. Now, one thing I noticed in many of your rubrics, the point value can be variable. I actually, in this rubric, picked 4 columns. One thing we don't want to forget is that some students just don't meet the benchmark or the expectations or the competency that we need. It's okay to give them 0. And you might have noticed that on some of your feedback, I may have given you a column that I called not gradable. And that not gradable column is really an opportunity for you to give a really clear message to the student that that particular area of the project or the paper or whatever really needs more work, and it does not meet your benchmark expectations. These 2 columns, reserve your highest column for those pieces of the performance that a student may have that go above and beyond what you expected as the benchmark. The second column usually being your benchmark score. This is reserved for the passing grade or the passing score or the passing competency. A lot of rubrics, you'll see this 3rd column. Again, it's really to show the student, yeah, you got some of the work accurate and complete, but you didn't quite make the benchmark. This column helps you guide the student in, for example, rewriting a paper or doing a final draft of a piece of work. It gives them a real clear idea of what they're missing. As you go further down, in a rubric, you'll notice that things like mechanics and style. One thing that I think is important for us to remember as educators is that we are not necessarily going to be focused on the writing conventions like grammar, English, and APA format. But what is important for us is that the paper is readable. So this was a piece of work I did quite a while ago. So now instead of mechanics and style, I call that piece readability. Am I able to read the paper easily, or do the errors detract me from the meaning of the paper? Again, this is really to prepare students for things like journal writing or writing professional papers at work. It's important that they know that there's a certain standard of readability that we're looking for. And rubrics are an important piece of simulation, for example, and skills competency. So the more clear you can make your rubric, at least 3 columns, and the more clear you can make the expectations for the students so they understand what they need to be doing to reach the benchmark score, is incredibly important and helps them really focus their study or their competency development. We did talk a little bit about formative assessment and as a link to the importance of giving feedback to our learners. This is just a simple example of a quiz that I created. You'll notice that I used a variety of different types of questions, which often is helpful as you develop your questions for any kind of quiz or exam. That way you can test the same principles a number of different ways, and hopefully students will be able to perform in a variety of different ways. True-false questions, not used very much in nursing education today. However, they can be effective in trying to identify if a student really has a basic understanding or knowledge level. On the other types of questions that I have available on this particular quiz, is this matching? This was a particular quiz on, can a student identify a pedigree symbol that they use in genomic family pedigree charts? One of the important things if you're going to use a matching question is that you have more answers. This is not an ideal question, but you should have more answers than you do actual first parts. So I should have had at least 2 more answers on this side so that the student really did have to know exactly and not have to guess that whichever one was last goes to that symbol. Another matching question here, same format, just a little different related to the concept. You'll notice on this one I did actually have 2 extra answers, which is a more effective matching question. One of the last types of questions that we can use is the classic short answer. This is a fill-in-the-blank question where the student had to identify the difference between, in screening tests, between reliability and validity, but also sensitivity and specificity. This is a good way to test basic vocabulary or information that you really need the student to understand. And this final type of format is a fill-in-the-blank or short answer. These can be if you have a large volume of students in your learning group, this can be incredibly time and labor intensive. So it might behoove you to reserve this for smaller classes or very specific needs where the student doesn't have a lot of flexibility in the answer. We did talk in class a little bit about, and it was in your text readings, a little bit about the format of a multiple choice exam. Again, that is a process that's ongoing for you as a learner, as an educator, to write a really good formatted NCLEX style question, for example, which is our benchmark in most certification exams and the NCLEX passing exams, you really do need to take time to practice. Make sure you use all the tips and guidelines they had in Orman text. Keep that by your side as you're going through an exam to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements, including, is this test readable by students with English as a second language? Is the language simple, and are all your distractors reasonable and answers that people would expect to see? Of course, once we have created all of our assessments and we've done our assessment blueprint, we have to analyze the exam. This is a really mishmashed. I do not like this one, so we're not going to use this. But you will get, on a standardized exam, you'll get printouts, especially if you're in an academic or a larger institutional setting, of the results of your exams or quizzing. You'll get a little bit of statistical analysis, including a median score, which is your score right in the middle, most frequent score, your mean score, which is your average of all the scores, and then this thing called the KR20, or the reliability coefficient. That gives you an indication of, if I gave this exam to another group of students at another point in time, would this exam actually measure what I think it should? And the higher the value, the better the exam. A couple things to think about when you're doing an analysis is you do need to make sure that you have a fairly large number of students in the group. If you have a very small group size, less than 25, you may have inadvertently skewed your results. So these might not be as valuable to you as the actual answers themselves. But if you test that exam over time, you may be able to develop reliability and validity for the exam. Finally, I think it's important to recognize that one of the most important pieces, as we've talked about a number of times in the conversations over the semester, has been giving student feedback. I think one of the biggest gifts we can give a learner is giving them direct and consistent feedback as to their performance. And in nursing, we often use clinical feedback, we use competency and skills testing feedback, and we give performance-based feedback. So it's incredibly important for us as we move forward as educators in whatever setting we give, to develop and continue to develop our sense of communication so that we can carefully and readily give good, consistent feedback to our students. The most important thing in thinking about feedback is that you want to be empathetic to the student's learning experience, but you also want to be direct and simplify your answer so that the student can really understand what you're looking for, and do it in a respectful and civil manner when giving feedback. I did appreciate all your discussion posts over the semester, particularly in the area of giving feedback. I thought many of your answers were very creative, and I thought you were very caring in your feedback. I think that makes a good learner. It also makes an excellent educator as you think about different roles that you might take on in the future once you get your degree and you start doing more and more education in different roles. I do think nurse leaders and nurse educators are constantly needing to give feedback, and this is part of growing as a nurse professional. And I think that it behooves us as master's prepared advanced practice nurses to really develop our feedback skills over time. So that's all I'll share this afternoon. I will be posting the final exam on Canvas, and you can upload your document to ExamSoft like we did last time. And I hope to have everybody's exam graded no later than next Friday. if you are going to be delayed in your submission, please let me know as soon as possible. I do need to process your grade as soon as possible after the 20th. So please make sure that you take your time. When you prepare for the final, make sure that you have access to your current assessment and evaluation paper that you submitted. I also would love you to use your textbook as a reference and any other articles or anything that you printed for yourself over the semester. There will be, excuse me, real life. There will be a self-reflection question on the exam. As I said, I wish each of you tremendous success over the rest of this week. And I look forward to seeing what you do next semester. Wishing you a great, happy holiday season. Whatever you choose to do, I hope you get some time to rest and relax. And look forward to seeing you in the spring. Thank you.